Hey, I'm Al Kavadlo, and we're working out. Thanks for listening to my podcast. My guest this week is Yuri Marmerstein. Yuri Marmerstein is an acrobat and movement teacher based out of Las Vegas. If you enjoyed this episode, go ahead and leave a 5-star rating on iTunes or wherever else you're listening from. And make sure to check out my new book, Next Level Strength, the ultimate rings and paraleads program. All right, let's go ahead and get into the interview. Yuri, something I like about you is that even though you have a big online following, I get the impression that you're actually more interested in working with people in person. Is that the case?
It goes both ways. Obviously, online you can reach more people, but for me, it's the quality of the work is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens with any kind of online coaching, any kind of online courses, materials, there's always communication lost. No matter how good you are at teaching, at explaining, no matter how annotated your videos are, even if you have fancy graphics with lines that show this, no one will ever do it. Well, some people will, but the majority of people will never do it the way you intended, no matter how good you are at communicating. So I think there is nothing that can substitute real-time in-person coaching. And of course, it's good to have online templates. It's good to have materials. It's good to be able to reach more people in different ways. But no matter, that should always be the highest priority for anyone's coaching, anyone as a student, is the real-time in-person coaching with feedback.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. It's
Yep.
never going to be able to be completely replaced or replicated. And like you said, a lot of the online coaching, it's still a lot better than not having a coach at all. And there's a lot of benefits to having it. And I have a lot of clients that I do that with I'm amazed at how good the results can be when people actually do what you ask them to.
Yep. Yeah, for sure.
But you do
it.
a lot of traveling and a lot of workshops, and that's cool to see that you're not just putting it out there online, but you really want to interact with people. And I think that's what I was referring to.
Oh, yeah, for sure. For me, I don't learn from doing an online course. I learn other things, but the idea of doing an in-person workshop is there's that element of chaos, unpredictability. You don't know the gym, you don't know the group, and I think there's a lot of growth as a teacher that happens there that doesn't happen when you do it online.
I agree. I'm glad that you said that. And I think it takes a lot of experience to have that perspective on it. Did you feel when you first started doing the workshops that was something that surprised you, how much those variables could affect the workshop itself, no matter how prepared you may have been?
I remember the first couple, like when I started getting into workshops, I'm not one to plan. I kind of work better free flow improvisation. But I know the first couple, I planned, and I never write stuff down, but I wrote down itinerary, okay, this is what we're going to work on in the schedule. And I wasn't sure I had, my first weekend seminar, I didn't even know that I had enough information, and then I found out that I had way more than could be covered in a weekend. But yeah, it's this idea that it's good to have a general plan, but to me, the idea of having a plan and then following it is not really adapting to the situation, because you're going to get some people who, I know for me, one of the biggest lessons is what I thought was a beginner was not. So I've had to constantly reassess what
you
means
teach
to be
such a specific thing. In your world of handstands, the spectrum is so big that someone who's a beginner to one person might seem advanced to someone else, and that can continue onward indefinitely, right?
It's so much, so you have to have that broad spectrum. So it's this idea that if I have only one way to teach it, I have one kind of rehearsed method of the workshop, it's not going to reach as many people as if I know how to adapt it to not only different levels of ability, but different learning styles, because, a weightlifter is going to learn something a lot differently than someone who comes from a dance background.
Absolutely.
Same
you can't
thing.
necessarily assume a progression is going to be the same for everybody, and what's easier for one person is harder for the next person, and people will surprise you with what they are or aren't capable of sometimes, right?
Yeah. And one thing a couple of things really interesting to me. One is in this idea of teaching is that sometimes I have to give paradoxical cues for the same skill. Mm-hmm. So sometimes two people working on exactly the same move, I have to tell them to do opposite things, and they're both right, which I love that idea. And yeah, just that idea of adaptation, of problem solving. It's like, okay, I have this way to explain it. I reach someone with it, they get it, good. Okay, the next person, they didn't get it. So how can I adapt the material so they can understand it from their perspective?
As a teacher, I feel like I'm constantly wrestling with that same dilemma. If my student isn't getting what I'm trying to teach them, is it on them or is it on me? And ultimately, I take responsibility and say, it's on
Sure.
me. I got to figure out another way to explain it.
Yeah.
And I think some coaches say, well, this person just can't learn it, and they get frustrated. And I think that that's a really important skill to do what you do and, what I do, which is, travel and teach large groups, like you were saying. Do you remember the first workshop you ever taught?
I remember a few because I did kind of like experimentally a few workshops where I didn't really, it was more for the experience than for the money, also because I didn't really know anything about business back then.
Uh-huh.
So but I remember a few in particular. And I remember the first weekend seminar that I did as well, because the first couple workshops were like, 2-3 hours.
Uh-huh. And how long of a weekend now? You do it like a full Saturday and Sunday?
I usually do a full Saturday, Sunday, 6 hours a day. I've done longer ones too, but 6 hours a day for me is not sustainable to do like many days.
Right.
2-3 days is kind of the max for that,
right,
energy-wise.
Yeah. Are you proactive about seeking out the host facilities, or do you tend to wait for them to approach you at this point?
It's a bit of both. It's kind of been a wave. I know in the beginning, I did a lot of, the cold emails. You have
Mm-hmm.
write out a paragraph. Here's my website. Check it out. And then, of course, most of them don't respond, but some of them do. Now that I've been doing it for a while, it's a bit easier. So either I've made enough connections or I have enough of a name that if I kind of put out feelers in a certain area, people are more likely to respond.
Did you ever work in a conventional Globo Gym type of setting?
No, I coached gymnastics for a while after I quit the corporate world. And I did some kind of, private lessons and all of that, but it was more skill focused.
When you say the corporate world, you mean a non-fitness job?
Yes, correct.
What was it that you were doing? I'm just curious.
I was doing environmental testing on radiation detectors for ports of entry into the country.
Wow, that's very specific, kind of like handstands.
Yeah, pretty much. So there was a point, it's interesting because I remember this. I did apply to work at a Globo gym up in Cleveland. And I remember the interview and, there's like an interview. And basically I gave the wrong answer because some of the answers that I was supposed to give was I want to make money for the gym.
Right.
And I was too interested in actually helping people.
Yes.
Basically.
Yes.
So I was too idealistic for that job.
In retrospect, do you feel like you kind of dodged a bullet by not getting hired there?
I just don't think I would have lasted long. I think, like, given my attitude and kind of like the way that I rebel, I just think I probably would have lasted a couple months and then I would have just stopped caring and then I would have just fucked off.
So he made the right call by not hiring you then.
Yeah, I think so.
So what was your first job in the fitness industry?
I guess coaching, well, let me think. I had a few jobs in college, but I don't think they were fitness related. So yeah, basically what happened is I had that corporate job out of college, and that lasted about a year on contract. And there was also a chance of me getting hired on salary, but I think it also worked out for the best that they didn't hire me. So then after that, I had some experience, not too much coaching experience at that time, a little bit, a couple of years. I got into coaching kids gymnastics, so I don't know if that's considered a fitness job.
Sure.
It's, teaching physical skills.
And the fitness is somewhat of a aside from learning the skills themselves, but
for sure.
I'll count that.
We had adult classes too, so it wasn't like only kids. So it was, I'd call that a fitness job. So yeah, I did that for a few years.
So you'd been doing gymnastics since you were a kid?
No, I had not. So that's the thing, right? So I was self-taught. I started just by throwing myself around in the backyard, towards the end of high school at around 17, 18. In college, I got into it more and I developed some skills. And I taught capoeira in college. So that was
Had you been training that for a long time?
No, I kind of got thrown into it because I did all this backyard stuff. And in college, I trained capoeira with a dance student who learned from a video game, and basically he left.
Sounds like a very formal education.
Pretty much, yeah. So he left, and I was like the highest level student at the time. So I took over the club just to try to keep things going. And then I also did cheerleading in college as a varsity Division 1 athlete, whatever. So there was a gym that I worked at in that area briefly before I moved back to Cleveland. And then in Cleveland, I applied for a couple gyms, and I worked at one in specific for like 3 years before I moved to Vegas.
And that was mostly teaching kids, you said, in that situation.
Mostly kids. It was some adults. It was some adult classes, some adult, personal, private lessons and all of that. But yeah, mainly like the bulk of the work was kids classes and kids competitive. But yeah, so I didn't do gymnastics as a kid. I kind of learned it on the fly and then just adapted to the
I guess
skills.
you took to it pretty quickly.
I wouldn't say that. I'm a pretty slow learner. I definitely fell on my face. I definitely could have.
Not to say that you were able to hold the handstand the first time you tried, but
Yeah, it took me about a year of falling on my back to be able to even hold the handstand.
isn't that relatively quickly in the world of handstands, though?
It depends. I could have. I know, like, given the retrospect of the level that I got to, I probably could have half that time if I
If you
knew more
knew
about
what you know
training.
now, right?
So, like, the level that it took me 10 years to achieve in handstands, I could have done realistically in 4 to 5 years if right, it's the
But
Rod
don't you think
Stewart,
that
whatever.
that made you a better teacher to have those
Well, it did.
failures and
Yeah.
learn from them?
So that's the advantage and disadvantage is I'm a much worse athlete and practitioner than I could have been, but that growth went through in teaching, so I'm a much better teacher than I would have been if I did everything right the first time.
I can relate to what you're saying tremendously because I'm mostly self-taught on all the stuff that I do also. And I feel like part of what makes me a good coach for beginners and, guys who are getting into this later in life is that I remember what it was like to be an adult and suck at this stuff and fail at it. And I think sometimes when people learn it as a kid, they just take for granted. And like you said earlier, you forget how remedial a
Yeah.
beginner can sometimes be.
Yeah, and it's interesting seeing like a lot of these high-level teachers who learned as kids and are high-level athletes. It's just interesting how frustrated they get when someone doesn't understand something. And I get it. I get where they come from because it's like, how do you explain how do you explain to somebody how to walk, how to breathe? Something that you learned when you didn't have to consciously learn it, when you learned it by nature.
Yeah,
So it's a very different learning process, and
you know,
it's important to understand that.
it's funny you say that because I've got a 1-year-old daughter and she's just learning how to walk. And it's kind of cool just watching her and seeing how much time and practice that takes. And we're designed to walk on our feet.
Yeah.
And I think about handstands a lot. I'm like, man, it's taken this kid a long time to learn to stand and walk on her feet. No wonder it's so hard as an adult to learn to stand
Yeah.
on your hands.
And not only does it take a few years to learn how to stand on your feet, it's like a full-time job at
Yeah,
that
exactly
point.
right. They're
You're
not
training
working
all
on
day,
anything
every
else
day.
simultaneously,
Yeah.
except I guess learning to talk, which is kind of a big
Yeah.
thing. So you travel a lot now for workshops. Have you always had the wanderlust?
I don't know that I've ever had it. I just kind of just kind of fell into it.
So do you feel it's kind of a necessity that you have to travel in order to stay busy?
So I'm actually trying to transition to travel less at this point. Like I've put in my years.
I
To
hear
me,
ya.
it's not. I'm not like Steve Maxwell. He's traveling full time, and I can't do that. That's not
Nomadic.
for me. Yeah. So I still want to travel, but definitely not as much as I'm doing now, just because it is a lot of stress. It is a lot of chaos. There's
Yeah.
nothing guaranteed. So it's not like I think people see that I announce a workshop like, oh, that's great. Like I just announced it. Like people still have to sign up.
Right.
Like, just because I say that I'm going somewhere, that doesn't mean that's money in my bank account.
Right.
So and now there's so many other people doing workshops as well. It's like the market's different than what it was. I know when I
Sure.
started in 2013, I think it was easier to get the workshops going because there just weren't that many people at that level doing it.
Yeah, I started teaching the PCC in 2013 also, and we've definitely had a better attendance those first few years, and we're doing more of them, and things are slowing down a little bit. And I'm in the same boat that you are, thinking of, all right, I want to transition away from traveling so much anyway, because I got a kid now, and I want to spend
Yeah,
more time at
sure.
home. So that's part of the impetus to do this podcast and just
Yeah,
try
just
different things.
just
So
the ratio. Like I know I'm still figuring out, but I know that the amount that I'm traveling now is a lot more than I want to do in the future.
Yeah, you get burned out on it. And I feel
Yeah,
the
for
same
sure.
as you. I was never somebody who really felt the need, like, I want to see the world and go everywhere. But I had this opportunity and I thought I'd be crazy not to do
Yep.
this.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
So I took advantage of it. But it definitely is demanding. And I think it's
Yeah.
something that people can easily glamorize. But the
And
reality of it is it's brutal.
it's different when you do it for work too. So it's not
Yeah,
like I don't even know how to take a vacation at this point
right.
because every time I travel, I'm booking work. So that's like all I think about. So it's hard. I was in Ireland for a couple of weeks a
Hmm.
month ago, and that was the first, like the closest thing to a vacation I've ever taken. But it's like, yeah, I guess people don't realize traveling for work is so much different than like you're not on holiday all the time.
Exactly. You don't really get to relax unless you have an extra day
Yeah,
at the end of it. But then it's like you want to get
yeah,
home and you have other things you got to do.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's crazy. You and I really have a lot in common, more than I
Yeah,
realized, not just
yeah,
the
definitely.
beard.
Yeah.
Do you get a lot of people who come to your workshops who you feel like you have a lot in common with outside of just calisthenics?
Yeah, I think so. I think, you know, how like the energy that you put out, eventually the people that wouldn't have liked your content wouldn't go anyway. So
Right.
it's like after you've been doing it for a few years, I think it's more the people that resonate with your message and with your personality are the ones that are more likely to show up.
Do
So
you,
I
do
know
you get a
I've
lot of
been,
guys with big beards?
I get a few, and I give them a good nod, a good like,
Yeah.
hello, sir, I see your beard. I also have a beard. Good eye. Yeah, I guess just with the personality and the message you put out, like that's another thought that I had recently is that I've been getting better groups in my workshops as I've been doing more workshops, and I think that's the case is you
It's
weed out the
self-selecting.
people, yeah, you weed out the people that wouldn't have liked the way you present the material anyway. So the people that do show up are the ones that appreciate your message.
I feel like that too, to a certain extent. Did you feel like you used to get kind of nitpicky people who would, want to second guess a lot of your teachings?
Yeah, yeah, you know, you still get them, of course, but I've been getting less, and I think it's just that reason that,
Perhaps, like you said, you're also getting better as an instructor and able to mitigate that
oh,
stuff before
sure,
it even comes
yeah.
up.
And honestly, I don't mind it. I tell people like question me. I'm not God. I'm not the authority. I
I
encourage you to
agree.
question me. I will give a reason, a precise reason for everything I do, and you don't have to agree with that either. Like I'm not telling you that this is the authority. I'm telling you that this is what I learned from my experience in doing it,
Sometimes
and
people
that's it.
can't handle hearing that.
Yeah,
They just want to know. But just tell me, what's the answer?
yeah.
But life
And the
doesn't work
answer is
like that,
different for
right?
everyone. You have to find your own. Yeah, and yeah, people really want to know that there's a universal, that there's
Yes.
one thing they can do that's going to give them the results they want, and it's not the case.
And I think the more time that you spend in any discipline, like you were saying earlier, you find that different things work for different people, and there isn't an answer that can be applied to anybody. And
Yep.
it's hard
And
for
that's what
people
I've
to
seen.
wrap
Yeah,
their
like
heads around that.
the more that I know and the more information and knowledge and experience that I've gathered, like the less qualified I feel to even
The
teach
more you
anything.
realize how little you really know.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. I feel like you're someone who's continually trying to get better, not just as a practitioner, but also as a teacher. And I think that causes you often to be critical of yourself. I saw you had posted a thing on Instagram this morning where you were holding a one-handed handstand. And the caption said something like, "Oh, my form is garbage" or something. And I'm like, dude, you're holding a handstand on one hand. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
But that's so passe for you now. You just know that that's a given that you could do that, right?
It's well, I mean, once you see like the possibilities, right? Before I moved to Vegas, for example, I had never even met anyone better than me at handstands. So I
Uh-huh.
thought, I thought I was hot shit. And then I moved to Vegas and I see
You
like
got a
actual like circus hand
got a
balancers and it
reality
was a
check.
yeah, like whoa, I suck. And now it's more so like yeah, I've had some injuries. I haven't been training as much the last year or two. So now it's more so like my own disappointment that my handstand level is less than what it was when I was training it more and before this wrist injury and all of that. But it's life.
Yeah.
But I have to be critical because if someone else tells me that it's good and I accept it, then I'm not trying to get it better. So for me, it's like I will never concede into thinking anything I do is good because I know that that's like a defeat.
Well, I mean, I get what you're saying, and I see that you're smiling when you say it. But I mean, at a certain point, you do feel proud of an achievement or an accomplishment, or if you
Oh
after you
yeah, of
wrap up a
course.
successful workdown, like that's a nice feeling, right?
Oh, of course. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You have to.
And it's good to
I
celebrate those
but yeah,
things. But
it's
it's
like you say, you have to celebrate, but to me, it's important to celebrate, but don't accept that this is the best that it could be.
Yeah, I agree. That's something that I find I wrestle with a lot, and that a lot of the time clients of mine have that, and it frustrates me because we'll be working on a skill for a long time, and they finally nail it, and it's like, okay, now what? How do I get better at this? And it's like, hey, you can do this handstand now. Remember,
Yeah.
for like a year, that was just the goal, was to do the darn thing. But that's the nature of goals. Is as soon as we reach them, there's just, okay, we need a new goal.
Yeah.
Now it's not enough.
Yeah.
Do you do a lot of one-on-one training in person?
Not as much. I think the last couple of years, I don't really try to promote it too much. I like have it open if people seek me out. As I transition to traveling less, I'll probably start doing a bit more of that. So I do some, but right now it's not like the bulk of my business.
If you get people who reach out to you, is it generally handstand specific? Do people ever just want a personal trainer in your area and they get referred to you?
Um, Not really. It's usually pretty skill specific now that I think about it.
Do you think that, if you are planning to do more one-on-one stuff, that you'll need to branch out and do just more general fitness with people?
Yeah, probably. And sometimes I include it anyway. Like even, sometimes even to get the skills to the level that people want, they need more general fitness. And
Right.
sometimes that's the reality.
If someone's
So
really out of shape
sometimes,
and they ask me,
yeah,
what's the first step to doing a handstand? I'm like, you got to get 10 good push-ups first.
yeah. Yeah, sometimes it is. So sometimes the skill session ends up being more of a conditioning session because that's what they need to do first to be able to handle the skills. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, for sure. I'm open to it. I have the ability to do all of it. So that the skill training to me is more interesting because there's more of an option for failure. But yeah, as I transition to more one-on-one, it's, what people want to do and then try to get them those results.
Yeah, I mean that's what it all comes down to, and I think it's interesting nowadays how the fitness industry has, like you said, gone away from one-on-one person, and everyone's doing it online. And I'm sure you see these ads popping up constantly in your Facebook and Instagram feed, like here's how to get like thousands of online clients with our
Yep, so
magic
many.
script and stuff. And some of that stuff, there's some merit to that type of marketing, but I think there's a lot of misleading information about. And this was the same thing when I got started in the fitness industry before the online thing. Just people misunderstanding how hard it really is to run a successful fitness business and keep clients coming in.
Yeah. Oh, that was a huge awakening for me. Like I thought, okay, I can do the skills. Like I look the part, I'm a good teacher, and that's not enough to run a business.
Yeah.
And it's
That's
amazing
just a
how
given.
much yeah.
Or
That's
should
just something
be.
that you should have. And a lot of people are good at running businesses and they don't even have those skills at all.
Right.
So that's like one of the kind of big slaps to the face that I got is it's running a business is a completely separate skill. And I don't get to train as much as I used to because I'm spending now so much more time running the business end of things.
I think there's probably people who are listening who might be surprised because they think, oh, Yuri's got whatever, 50,000 Instagram followers. I just
Yep.
assume he's got people beating down his door for one-on-one training and he can't barely accommodate all of them. But clearly that's
Yeah.
not the case.
It's really not the case. And its followers are not so that I've been trying to calculate what portion of those followers have given me money.
Right.
And I think even to have a big following, because what happens is that the bigger the following you have, the less percentage of your people see your posts. So
Right.
I think honestly, as a business account, probably right above 10 grand is the best to have because you're going to get more. Like I have a beard account, right, with 2,000 followers.
I did not know about this. I'm gonna have to check it out.
And posts on that get better, like they do better than they do on my 50,000 follower account. I think partly because of a smaller following and partly because I just post the same shit. So it's like they know what they're getting,
Well,
just beard photos.
The
But
beard market is probably less saturated than the handstand market at
that's
this
true.
point.
That's true. But yeah, it's like, yeah, this idea that followers don't mean anything. Business is completely different. And that's what I've realized is having a big following isn't necessarily that beneficial to running a business.
It's true. Some of the best and most successful in-person trainers I know are hardly on social media at all because they're too
Yep.
busy actually training people.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. And yeah, and it becomes a time hog. It's good. I like to post and I like to reach people, but at the same time, it's like it's kind of this black hole that sucks up a lot of time.
It
Because
certainly
once you
can.
get a following, then there's a pressure to continually post and to continually make content. And it's like I've been working on my second book really hard, the last few weeks because I've been at home. And it's like every time I make a social media post, it's taking away time from working on the book that's actually going to make me money. Whereas the social media posts are just to, remind people that I'm still here.
Well, it's such a hard thing to quantify, like you said, to know how much of an effect it's even really having. I always have this
Yeah.
thought, like, well, everything I'm doing is working. I'm selling enough books and workshops and products and one-on-one training that it's all keeping me afloat. But it's hard to know if I stop posting on Facebook, would some of that slow down, or I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know, like you said, how many of those people, how many people listening to this podcast are the same people buying my products?
Yeah, exactly.
I have lots of books that I'm not listening to the author's podcast. I'm not following them on social media, but I read their book. And vice versa. People, maybe I follow their account, but I didn't buy their book.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating thing for me to ponder. But at the same time, I enjoy doing it. And it's interesting what you said about working on a book and feeling like social media is a distraction, because I feel like social media has been something that I've been able to use as a tool to help me with my writing. I can make a post, and sometimes that post could then turn into a section of the book because people start asking questions about it, and it gets me to start thinking about it and elaborate it more and see it from the viewpoint of my audience. Is that something that's ever happened to you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've gotten a lot. Like English was my worst subject in school, and then I wrote books. So it's like, and the social media for sure helped with that because it's just practice. And same thing, I do like the Instagram Live. To me, it's practice talking.
Yeah.
Because sometimes people ask questions that go into technique, and it's like, wow, I never even thought of the technique that way. And being forced to answer it live, stream of consciousness, made me a better speaker.
Yeah.
So it's for sure. And even if the post doesn't do well, you're always going to reach at least one person who got a benefit from that. So that's always a plus as well.
Yeah. Do you get a lot of like private messages from people who want to tell you that they achieved a handstand or unlocked some skill because of your
Yeah,
advice?
absolutely. And sometimes it's like stuff that I posted years ago that they're just bringing up, and it's cool. Yeah, it's always good to see that.
Are you able to respond to everybody, or do you get too many messages to keep up with them all?
No, I try to respond to everybody. I don't get too many that it overwhelms me.
Do you find that sometimes people will take advantage of that though and just like keep hammering you with questions and
Yeah.
expect free training?
Yeah. So definitely, like when people ask, technical questions, if it depends on how much work they put into the question also. So if it's like,
Yeah.
if I see that
It's a good way of
they're
putting
like,
it.
hey, can you give me some tips for my handstand? Like, well, I do this for a living. But if I see that they really put in research, they really train, they really like, or one of my favorite questions is, like, here is an item from your book. Here's me working on it. This particular section was unclear or the language was murky. Can you clarify it? So I like questions like that because it tells me that they've read, they've put in the research,
Yeah.
and only after putting in the research something was not clear, as opposed to just, oh, give me knowledge, give me answers.
But don't you also sometimes get people who read your book and ask you a question that's like directly addressed in the book, and you're like, turn to
yeah,
page
yeah, I get that all
37
the
and read
time.
this paragraph?
Or sometimes, I'll put out, I think people don't realize how long I've been putting out information.
Yeah.
So I'll do the Instagram things like, hey, what do you guys want to see? And they'll just post stuff that
What's
like
your
5,
diet?
6, no, or they'll just post stuff that 5, 6, 7 years ago I already covered.
Yeah.
So it's
Or 5,
like-
6, 7 months ago, and
Yeah.
5, 6, 7 years ago.
It's like, I know it's not as organized as it could be, but sometimes if you just scroll down, like it's all been there.
I always remind people that my content, and I imagine this is probably true for you too, is easy to find because we have unique names.
Yep.
If someone Googles your name and whatever they're looking for information on, they'll probably find a post or an article you wrote about it, and then it'll save them the time from having to message
Yeah, that's
you.
true.
I find I
Yeah.
often wind up Googling things for people just to send them the link. Hey, Al, how do I get better at pull-ups? If you just
Yeah.
put in Al Kavadlo, increase pull-ups or get better at pull-ups, I've written like half a dozen articles on it.
Yeah.
But I'm grateful that people are taking the time to write me, so I try
Yeah,
to
for
remind
sure.
myself of that. And I'm the same as you. I do my best to respond to everybody, but sometimes if people do push it and keep asking too many questions, I say, look, at a certain point, you got to pay me for coaching or
Yeah,
or
same
we
thing.
gotta-
There's
we
like a
gotta
level
end
where
this.
it's like, I want to help everybody, but at the same time, I have to, I have rent to pay. We all have rent to pay.
Yeah. Well, I think people can forget that it's a
Yep.
job. It's your career. You wouldn't go to your dentist and expect them to give you a cavity filling for free just because,
Yep.
you asked them to on Instagram.
Yeah, for sure. And it's like anything else. Yeah, it's the skill and knowledge to explain it and to be able to do it took years to acquire.
Are dentists on Instagram trying to build up their business, like showing, like, look at this root canal I did? Wonder if that's a thing.
They probably do for like the fake teeth, the Hollywood teeth.
Right.
I don't know if they're showing root canals, but they're probably showing, like the big white fake,
I guess a root
whatever.
canal isn't the sexiest procedure.
I had one once, and I watched it through the reflection. It was interesting.
Ouch. I have been thankful enough to avoid that so far in life.
Yeah, but I don't think they would have put that as their as their advertisement.
Yeah, and it's just interesting to think how the fitness business has changed, but then to extrapolate that and just business at large has changed because of social media and because of the
Yeah.
internet.
And right, it's that idea of presentation over content too, is like, you're going to have personal trainers who look good because whatever, they have good genetics or maybe they're taking steroids. And how much does that equate to actually being able
Right.
to help people and teach people? And sometimes it's hard to see the difference of someone, or same thing with handstands. Like there are so many good handstanders now, but the
Yeah.
reality is that how many of them
Can
are
teach
effective
it.
teachers?
Yes.
And part of the reality is that someone who's naturally really good at the skill, even though what they can do is amazing, they're probably not as good at breaking it down for beginner levels.
Exactly.
Or it's the same thing. The personal trainer who looks amazing is probably doing more time training than teaching. So probably the trainer who doesn't look as good is spending more time actually teaching people.
Well, this issue is definitely older than the internet because I
Yeah.
remember working as a trainer in gyms before social media and all of that, and these conversations coming up, is that guy a bad trainer because he's fat? And it's like, well, he knows how to give people a good workout.
Yeah, for sure.
He's punctual, he's professional, he's friendly, and then this other trainer who maybe has a great body but who's late for his sessions or is a jackass or who doesn't know how to give people proper instruction.
Yeah. So it's that idea of working. Are you working for yourself or are you working for other people? I think ultimately it should be both. You shouldn't give everything to everyone all the time, but at the same time, if you're only self-centered, then you're not as effective as you could be at helping people.
Someone who couldn't do a handstand at all shouldn't really be teaching it, right?
Yeah.
So someone who's
Yeah.
not really fit looking at all maybe shouldn't
For
be a
sure.
trainer, someone could say.
But at the same time, someone who's only trained themselves needs to get teaching experience before starting to really get
Absolutely.
themselves out there as a teacher.
So there's a lot that goes into being a good fitness trainer. It's hard to pin down exactly
Yeah.
what it entails. And it goes back to what you were saying before about being yourself, and you'll ultimately attract people that you click with. And that's always a piece of advice that I give to new trainers, because I think in the beginning, and I know I was guilty of this, you want to try to be everything to everyone.
Yeah.
And you eventually realize that that's going to make you nothing to nobody.
Yeah. I think there was a song from the 90s with those lyrics.
More or less, yeah. A lot of the way my brain works is influenced by pop culture from the 90s.
Yeah.
Music and The Simpsons. I find myself quoting The Simpsons and not even realizing I'm quoting The Simpsons, or quoting
Sorry.
an Everclear song, as the case may
Yeah.
be. And
Yeah,
not even
there it is. Yeah. I was
not
thinking
even
of it.
realizing it, because it's just this stuff is embedded into my subconscious.
Yeah.
I want to talk about your book a little bit more, because you were saying how you were not really someone who was much of a writer, and writing a book is making you kind of have to hone that skill a little bit. I'm curious what that's like for you and what made you want to take on writing a book as someone who doesn't see themselves as a writer.
Right. It took a while to appreciate the idea of language, but now it's like I'm more obsessed with it. Even the specific wording someone uses just to describe themselves can already say so much.
Absolutely. If
And
someone tells you they're humble, they're not really humble, for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah, it's the ones that don't say anything. But so I was approached by someone to write the book because at that point there weren't really any handstand. There weren't any kind of materials out there that weren't outdated by 100 years.
So it was really opportunity that made you
Yeah.
decide you wanted to do
So
this. That makes sense.
and eventually they actually quit because I took too long to write it. But it's just
Writing a book-
interesting
writing
getting.
a book takes a long time.
Yeah, it took a couple years, and I think 4 times I just scrapped the whole thing, deleted it, started over.
But that's part of
Yeah.
the process,
Yeah.
That's falling out of your handstand before
And
you hold
it's-
it.
To me, there were still, so this idea of the communication of how can I simplify the language enough that when people read it, they're less likely to get it wrong. They're still going to get it
Yes.
wrong. They still do. They still
That's a
misinterpret.
great way of putting it, though. You chose your words very well there.
Yeah, for sure. And it's like, to me, it was a lot of simplifying the language, simplifying the redundancies, just, not using overly technical words because a lot of people reading it are not first language English
I'm so glad
speakers.
to hear you say that, because I think that's another amateur move that people
Yeah.
think makes them sound like an expert, but really, to me, it makes them sound like they're not an expert when they use
Makes it
tons
sound
of
like,
unnecessary
yeah,
terminology. It's like,
they're
who are you
trying
trying to impress?
compensating.
If you really know this stuff, just explain
Yeah.
it.
Unless you're teaching a group of doctors or surgeons and we
Right.
have to go into the specific anatomy, it's like, yeah, your shoulders.
There's always that one guy, like we were alluding to at the CERT, though, who wants to test your
Yep.
anatomical knowledge and ask you
Yep.
questions about origins and insertions and scapular positions and things like that. And it's like, really, that stuff's not relevant when we're trying to learn the technique.
Really not. Yeah, and even still, like it's interesting. Even somebody at a recent seminar who's a French guy, so speak English but not first language. I included a whole nother section of my next book because of that, because he realized some of the cues that I wrote could have been more clear, and I had to explain to him specifically like one cue that I added in the book that I thought was as clear as it could have been, and turns out it wasn't.
He still
So now in
found
the
a way to
second book-
misunderstand it.
Yeah. So now I added a glossary of terms to make sure that the terminology, even though it's not anything complicated, that when I use this term, it's clear what that means in relation to the skill. So it's always, and it's the same thing. I'm going through the second edit of my book now, just kind of taking out the, when I write the same thing twice. And yeah, just trying to, and I'm still going to take it to an editor as well, just because that's important.
You need to get a fresh set of eyes on it for sure. They're going to see things that you just didn't see.
Yeah, there are so many, and it surprised me in the first book. I thought I had it all down, and then I sent it to the editor, and it's like, whoa,
There's still 500 mistakes in here.
Still surprised me I even wrote that. But yeah, for sure, it's so useful. And it's very different than a social media post because it's this idea of there's no instant gratification. Social media post,
Right.
Half an hour, I write a good caption, it's there, I get likes. The book, 2 years later, I'm still writing it. So it's a different thing.
Well,
I
it's
guess,
sort of
allocating time.
like learning a handstand. It's a lot of just putting in the time in a very unglamorous way,
Absolutely.
sucking
Yeah.
at it, but because you love the language the same way you're fascinated by the movement of the body, that's the reason to do it. It's not about the outcome. It's not about the instant gratification, like you said. It's about enjoying the process. And I think that's a really good thing that unfortunately a lot of people want to rush past that, whether it be in their fitness journey or I'm sure you get this from people too. They're like, oh, you wrote a book? I want to write a book. I'm working on a book.
Yeah,
it's like,
go for
okay,
it.
everybody's working on a book.
Yeah, and it's even this one, every time I think I'm going to get it done by a certain point, it's not. Like my first edit, I wrote an extra 30 pages. Like I thought the whole thing was done, and it wasn't.
Something that I started doing after I wrote a few books that was a game changer for me was I started reading the entire manuscript out loud when I thought I was done with it.
Yeah.
And man, there were so many things that I realized didn't need to be in there when I started doing that. And so many just better ways of saying things. As you're about to read it, you're already thinking in your head, this sounds ridiculous the way I wrote it. I got to edit this.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's a good thought. It's the same thing I tell people with their handstand training. It's like what you do today, it's not for today. What you do today is for where you're going to be in a year, in 2 years.
It's also like the handstand training and calisthenics in general. I think people often have in their mind's eye an idea of what their movement looks like. And then you show them a video or a photo and you're like, this is what it actually looks like. And they're like, what? And I think that's true of writing. You don't see, the editor is going to see things you didn't see because it's so hard to be objective about yourself.
Yeah, so important. Even if you think that you're objective and you think you see the world as it is, it's never the case.
No,
there's always something skewed.
And I think that's just the fact that you have the willingness to acknowledge that you can't be objective is like huge, and most people aren't willing to do that.
Absolutely.
Oh, it's really refreshing to talk to you.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, a lot of good points.
Shouting into the echo chamber, as it were.
Yeah.
Something that you and I have in common besides calisthenics is beards. And I think that they actually have a similar thing in that I got really into beards at one point, and I was growing my beard crazy long. I think when I ran into you in Australia a couple of years ago, I had it like about halfway down toward my belly button.
Yeah, you had a much bigger one.
And, you lose sight of how big it is because you're just comparing yourself to like the best in the world who have a beard down to their waist or whatever. And I think that can happen with handstands too and with calisthenics too. Like you were saying earlier, when you got to Vegas, you were like, holy crap, I suck. But really, compared to the general population, you're still great. Yeah. Like that happens with facial hair. You're like, wow, my beard's nothing because it's not as big as Billy Gibbons or whatever. But now I have a better perspective. I look at that beard, I'm like, God damn, that thing was humongous. But at the time, I had body dysmorphia about it, I think.
Yeah. No, and it's always there. It's always like, right, like I'll go to a workshop and people be like, oh, I want my handstand to be like Yuri's. And then I'm here be like, well, my handstand is half mediocre by my
Yeah.
own standards. And it just goes on and on.
Yeah.
So
So
it's so easy now to compare because, when there wasn't all of the social media, you couldn't see the top level. It was like you had to go to
that's
the
right.
circus to see a one-arm handstand,
That's
right? So I had
exactly
never,
right.
the first time I saw someone do a one-arm handstand is when I was a stagehand in college and I was working a show called the Golden Dragon Acrobats, so a bunch of Chinese acrobats. And at that point I was doing handstands, but I couldn't one-arm. And that was the first time I saw somebody do a one-arm in front of me, and I was like, whoa. But, you couldn't find it on the internet. There was like a
Yeah.
couple of YouTube videos, but now you see it all the time. It's so commonplace. And now you think like, and it's easier, I think, because of that to set the goal like, oh, I want a one arm by the end of this year. But the reality is probably not.
Well, people think it's more common than it really is because everyone who can do it is posting it on Instagram constantly. So it gives you a misrepresentation. I remember when I was new as a trainer, I had a client who asked me about a one-arm pull-up. And I had never seen one. I'd never thought to train for one at that point. And I didn't even think it was possible. And this was before YouTube. So now, obviously, lots of people have seen it done. Some people have seen me do it. For some people, I've been that person. And that's a weird feeling.
No, yeah, for sure. I was in Ireland recently, and I don't realize it, and then I do a one-arm handstand. So I was like, that's the first one I've ever seen in person. And yeah, to me, it's weird because I've seen so many now. Mm-hmm. But it's just perspective.
Yeah, and I've judged a couple of beard contests, so I've seen some really crazy beards. Nice. But if I'm just like in a random airport somewhere, I probably have the biggest, gnarliest beard there.
Yep. Yeah, for sure.
Well, it's been a lot of fun talking to you, Yuri. Is there anything you want to throw out there before we wrap up? Final thoughts, or just want to let people know what you got going on?
No, not really. Just workshops coming up. You can check out my website, workshops, intensives. I'm going to start doing some more online stuff as well in the next couple months. So look out for that. Second book, hopefully also, in the next couple months, depending on things, is going to come out. So look out for that. Otherwise, I'm here wherever you want to find me.
Excellent. Yeah, Yuri Marmerstein, an easy name to forget, but once you remember it, a hard name to forget.
Yeah.
I think there's a quote like that from Schwarzenegger, but I think I got it wrong. I think Arnold said, a name that's hard to remember is also hard to forget. That's what I was trying to say, Yuri.
That's a good quote.
Yeah. Maybe it was Arnold, maybe it was someone else. You can credit it to me if you would like.
I will. Will do.
Because I'm the one who you heard it from first, like that first one-handed handstand.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, hell yeah, brother. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Hey. I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode. If you did, go ahead and leave a 5-star rating on iTunes or wherever else you're listening from. And make sure you grab a copy of my new book, Next Level Strength, the ultimate rings and paraleads program. Available now from Dragon Door Publications, Amazon.com, or anywhere else where you buy books. And check out my sponsor, Zero Shoes. That's Zero with an X.